Hello, I'm Dr. JODI Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. JODI Richardson, and it is a joy to bring to you each week a new guest to talk to us about anxiety, to talk to us about physiology, about neuroscience, about breathwork, about exercise and sleep and lifestyle, and all of the things that contribute to really good, robust mental health and our ability to cope when things are not so good, when life throws curveballs our way. Today's guest is a superstar. I can't wait to introduce him. But before I do, I just wanted to share with you this knowledge that we have in this space around anxiety, that anxiety disorders are actually the most common mental health issue worldwide. And it's a challenge for a lot of people, but part of the work that I do here at the podcast and that my guests are doing too is showing you how treatable it is, how there's so much within our own locus of control that can make a measurable difference to our experience of anxiety if we're prone to it. And of course, to know that anxiety is really natural, really normal, and not all anxiety is a disorder. So it's really important for us to remember that it's a very natural part of who we are as humans, and it's actually an emotion. We just happen to experience it very, very much in our bodies, as well as the way that it affects our thinking. And so when we are really highly anxious, the bias of our attention is towards threat. And that helps to really drive the anxiety response. It obviously affects what we do, or more specifically, what we don't do, meaning that we avoid so much of what can cause us anxiety. And that can really make life small. And I want the opposite of that for you. And for me, I am anxious as I sit here and record. I am every week. But it doesn't stand in the way of me doing what's important. My anxiety comes with me, and yours can too. Of course, our anxiety affects how we feel because it comes with, hand in hand with, a myriad of physical symptoms. And this is because our physiology plays such a key role, and as do our respiratory patterns. This is because our physiology, it's all integrated, it's all part of the experience of anxiety. Our physiology and the way we breathe, our respiratory patterns, can all amplify, but also we can take more control of our physiology and of our breathing and do the opposite, help to dial it back so that we're in control and that we can live the lives that we want to live for ourselves, and also help the people that we love to do the same. So here to help us learn more about physiology and our respiratory patterns, our breathing, is the incredible Campbell Will. He is a physiotherapist who focuses on root causes over symptoms, because when the symptoms are treated and the root cause isn't addressed, the symptoms will just return. So of course, it's a really powerful approach to the work that he does with his clients and through his teaching as well, especially for clients who are experiencing pain and dysfunction, as well as challenges with their mental health. He's a breathwork coach and educator. He's certified in heart math and physiology first functional training. Campbell is an Aussie living life in Hawaii. And so it's absolute joy to welcome you to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, Campbell.
Dr. JODI, it's a pleasure. I'm really excited to dive into a topic that I think can really help impact that people look at anxiety, but also just the role that their body plays, in the experience that we have as humans.
It's so important, and it's just, I feel so privileged to be able to have a podcast which gives me a platform to talk to people like yourself who are doing such important work and really leading the way in helping people to learn more about the agency that they have over their mental health and physical health, but also to have more understanding, because, I think, when we're struggling with pain or dysfunction or anxiety or other challenges in life, it can feel really difficult, and it can be a real struggle, and sometimes we feel like, oh, it's out of my hands. And our conversation today will really help people to know that there is a lot that they can do differently, and also just to help recognise some of the patterns that are existing that might be exacerbating the problem. So the first thing I'd love for you to do is to just please talk to us about the role of physiology when it comes to anxiety.
Yeah, amazing. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is like we hear this term stress physiology, right? It's referring to physiology, but when we hear the term anxiety, it's labeled a mental health disorder. So we immediately have this kind of disconnect where it's being generated more or less by the body and it's a physiological basis, but we're labeling it as a mental health problem, right? And that kind of distinction, I think it's something that happened quite a while ago, and it really has hurt us as humans that to understand that the body and the mind, there may be different expressions and we may talk about them differently, but we're really talking about the same thing. We don't have a separate body from a separate mind, right? We are a mind body. And so we have to take into account the role that our physiology is playing in our mental and emotional experience. So that's the first piece. But something you said a moment ago, right? There's a key word there of understanding. And I think it's so interesting. And I've done this experiment. You ask a bunch of people to define anxiety, and you get 10 different responses from 10 different people. It's this kind of like it's like, well, and often what I find is I ask people, hey, describe your anxiety. And what they do is they describe physiology to me. My heart pounds. I get sweaty palms. It feels like my chest is really tight. I can't breathe. It's difficult to get a breath. They're describing physiology to me. They just call it anxiety. And I think that's part of the problem, right? We've got this kind of like general label that may be explaining lots of different symptoms. Is it in my head? Is it in my body? Is it an emotional thing? Is it what's happening with my energy? And so when we start to kind of look at physiology, it becomes a little bit more of a conversation that we can all participate in. Your experience of anxiety might be different to mine, Dr. JODI, right? But our physiology will be behaving in a very similar way. And so when we remove the kind of like conversation about my experience versus your experience, and we actually look at the underlying physiology, now we've got some common ground, right? Now we can start to think, okay, well, is your anxiety coming from a change in your breathing, right? Are you holding your breath, which is causing a change in the chemistry of your blood? Or are you breathing really rapidly, which is causing a different change of the chemistry in your blood? If we understand that that's where your anxiety is stemming from, well, let's do something about that, right? Rather than what a lot of the time as we're instructed to do is manage the symptoms of our anxiety. And that's a really different point of entry, right? If we can start to think, well, your anxiety comes from holding your breath, what would happen if we taught you not to hold your breath in, for example, social situations or challenging environments? Well, your physiology is not going to change, and then you're not going to experience that disruption, which you label anxiety. So I think physiology is a point we can all agree on, even if our experience of anxiety is really, really different from each other.
I really appreciate the way you've answered that question because, and I want to get you to talk to listeners a bit more about when you said, well, we're really talking about stress physiology, but it gets labelled as anxiety. And so when I'm defining anxiety, it's the brain and body's response in anticipation of a threat. But essentially, we can think about something that's coming up. Somebody who experiences anxiety, the physiology that makes them feel very anxious, have that experience of anxiety in a social situation, might be thinking, oh my goodness, I've got something coming up, an event coming up. And just the thought of that, thinking ahead as to what's coming, can activate stress physiology. And so can you talk to us more about what you mean by stress physiology and how having this understanding can really just change the way people can start to view their experience of life's challenges?
Yeah, amazing. Well, let's start. I think it's always important. Let's define physiology because I think it's a term we always have heard, right? But what does physiology actually mean? And it's this super broad description, right? Physiology is kind of like the way in which the body or an organism functions. Like it doesn't necessarily tell us these hyper-specific things when we think of physiology. So part of physiology is how my nervous system is responding. Part of physiology is my biochemistry. Part of physiology is even my movement, my biomechanics, my posture. So when we say physiology, we're kind of like this all-encompassing thing of like, how is my body functioning? Coming back to your point is that, I think about something in the future, a social situation, and I start to feel anxious now. There's an in-between step that I think is not talked about enough, which is called anticipatory ventilation. I start thinking about the presentation at work, the conversation I have, the dinner I don't want to go to, my mother-in-law coming over, whatever it might be, and there's actually a change in my breathing patterns now. I might not notice that. right? So I might start breathing a little shallow. Maybe it's up higher into my chest. Maybe I stop and start and stop and start, this kind of chaotic pattern. And I start to feel uncomfortable and I start to feel a little bit anxious. And I tie my experience of anxiety to this situation that's looming, right? Instead of tying the experience of anxiety to the change in my physiology, that change in my physiology, I'm in control of. I just happen to have not noticed, right, that I started veering myself off course. And this is a really common thing, right? There's this whole new term called email apnea.
Oh my
right?
gosh, I experienced that. So I experienced that, yes.
Right? I open my inbox and I'm holding my breath while I'm seeing what's going to land on my plate today. What fires have I got to put out, right? Like what commitments have I, and so I'm holding my breath and I'm tying my physiology, right, to that looming event, positive or negative, right? And so all of a sudden we can start to look at what role is my physiology playing with what I call anxiety? And when we kind of take that one step further back is to say, what is the role of my breath playing on my physiology? Now we've got something that's kind of low-hanging fruit. What can I do with my breathing to impact my physiology that then impacts what I might call anxiety? And that's what the conversation is centered on around today. But we could replace the word anxiety with insert chosen word here. Right? How's it impacting my feelings of depression? How is it impacting my panic? How is it impacting my lack of energy? Right? Breathing impact from physiology impacting this experience that I have. And so physiology being our body functions, and that as if it listens to our breathing. And if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of like jump. I always like to take this almost back to like the evolutionary basis.
Yes.
Right? Let's go back a while ago. The proverbial tiger jumps out of the bushes. My breathing changes. I'm running away from the tiger, right? So for hundreds of thousands, if not 2 to 4 million years, when my breathing changed, it was because something in my environment cued it to change, right? The saber-toothed tiger, I'm running away, right? So for millions of years, we've responded to changes in our breathing, right? In relationship to changes in our environment. Something scary is happening, something threatening is happening. But today, right, let's come back to that example. I open my laptop and I see there's an email from my boss about the deadline that I missed. My breathing changes. The part of my brain that responds to my breathing isn't kind of making a distinction between the tiger and the email from my boss. It's going to trigger that same cascade of events in my body. The HPA axis, right, adrenaline, cortisol, preparation for threat. But what happens if that happens all day, every day? I wake up in the morning, I roll over and I check my phone, social media, I get a hit of dopamine, and then someone left a comment, and then I'm on the way to work and the traffic's bad, I'm late to work, and then there's and I'm in this constant state where my physiology is responding to stress. And that's never how it existed, right? It was like this acute stressor followed by a period of recovery.
Yeah.
But today it's just stressor after stressor after stressor after stressor. And so we live in this constant state of stress physiology. And it's no wonder why, as you touched on earlier, anxiety is the most common mental health disorder in the world today. I don't think that's just mysteriously appeared. I think it's part and parcel of the environment that we live in today, right? This rapidly changing world, the hustle culture, the don't worry about sleep when I'm dead, the commitments, there's so much of that forces us into this state of constantly doing and responding and reacting that we just get used to this state that we might call anxiety, that we might call stress, that it's just the new norm.
I relate to what you said about the email apnea and the changes in the breathing. And when I think back to my first experience of what I call anxiety when I was a kid, which was when I couldn't get a full breath. So I'd obviously I know now, obviously 4-year-old me didn't have a clue, but I had an upset tummy, because we know that when the stress response is activated, the digestion is downregulated, and so we can have these upset tummies, we can have nausea, and we can have vomiting and the like. But a huge part of it was my breathing, and Campbell, I was even prescribed a Ventolin as a teenager because I was having problems with my breathing, and it was not asthma. It was not asthma. It was this change in my ventilation because, particularly when I was playing high-level sport, I was experiencing, arousal, as you do when you are performing, whether that's physical activity or whether that's academically or professionally. And so it really helps us make sense of wherever we go, people are really struggling. and viewing at it through this lens of understanding the physiology, it's like, okay, right, this is activating my stress response. How can I close the circuit? How can I close the loop? How can I use my physiology, the things that I have control over, to actually start to coax my nervous system back into a place where we're in what we call ventral vagal, or rest and digest, or the green zone, or the just right phase, as Jessica Maguire explained recently. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that we've got this time together to talk more about it, because, particularly among, in families, it's very contagious, isn't it? The way our nervous systems are functioning in our homes. If I'm very, highly stressed, then, other people around me will pick up on it, and vice versa. But the breathing, this anticipatory ventilation, is something that if we can become more aware of it, then we can do something about it. So when you are teaching about breathwork and you're helping clients to develop new skills and habits so that they can recalibrate, what are some of the first things that you'll do to help people to sort of bring their attention? Because we can be so mindless and just dive right into the task at hand and not notice the change. And therefore, of course, then we start to feel pretty awful and we'll say we're feeling anxious. But if we can just be more mindful about the earlier changes, then we're in a position to sort of start to do something about it. Am I right?
Exactly. I think the model that I've kind of found my way to over the years of just assessing and treating breathing is awareness, control, optimization.
Right.
So often what we want is someone to teach us how to control or to optimize our breathing. But if that's not built on top of this foundation of awareness, it's kind of another Band-Aid approach. It's like, hey, give me an exercise to reduce my anxiety. Well, what if I could teach you about what causes your anxiety and you can catch it at the pass, right? Then you don't need an exercise to reduce your anxiety. You can just prevent yourself from experiencing it. But we're in, part of that, I think, is this, instant gratification where everything's at our fingertips and we want the solution now. And so when someone comes to me and I say, hey, for the next week, all I want you to do is pay attention to your breathing. They're like, what? No, give me an exercise. I'm like, I will.
Tell me what to do.
Tell me what to do now, But if that person starts to recognize, oh, I experience anxiety when I hold my breath. Okay, now we're one step upstream from the anxiety. When do you hold your breath? Oh, I notice I'm holding my breath every time I'm in this stressful meeting at work. Okay, right? Every time you're in that meeting at work, is there something, is it a project? Are you feeling pressure to speak? You don't like speaking in public? What do you think it is about that environment that's causing you to hold your breath? Actually, I have this deep-seated fear of public speaking. We're kind of walking upstream of this symptom or this experience of anxiety. And when we do that, all of a sudden now I can use tools to course correct. It's like, as I'm walking into that meeting, I can bring back a level of self-awareness of I'm going to breathe to a cadence, right? I'm going to breathe in for 4 and out for 5 in my head, and I'm not going to go unconscious, right? Because if I go unconscious, I'm going to hold my breath. Once I hold my breath, I'm going to feel anxious, and this cycle repeats. And so instead of saying, oh, here's an exercise you can do when you feel anxious, we haven't really addressed why you're experiencing anxiety. Without the awareness piece, we're just managing another symptom. And so that can be true of so many different things, We're developing a little bit more of what are these contributing factors, right? Or what's influencing my experience of anxiety? Because it's not random, right? It's not, although sometimes it might feel like it comes out of the blue, it rarely does. I may have missed a lot of these signals that I'm going in that direction. And I'd love to point, this research was done relatively recently that just really opened my mind to it. It's people that had out of the blue panic attacks. And they put these people that have self-reported out of the blue panic attacks, and they put them on 24-hour biofeedback, right? It was measuring things like their respiration, their sweating, their skin conductance. It was kind of looking at their physiology. And when they had a panic attack, they pressed this little button. And what that button did was took a snapshot of the previous hour of data. And then it compared that to the other hours in that 24-hour period. And when they asked the participants, well, what happened? The panic attack just happened. And then they look at the data. And actually, an hour before the panic attack, you started to change your breathing. You didn't notice it, right? Your breathing got faster. It got shallower. It got more erratic. You didn't notice any of those changes until you're so far off course that you had a panic attack. that person lacks the self-awareness or the breath awareness to realize I am pushing myself towards panic. But if I don't notice that and I can't course correct, yeah, it's likely that I'm going to have a panic attack that feels like it just came out of nowhere. And look at the research on interoception, right? My internal awareness of my body, we tend to find the higher anxiety, higher panic, higher stress have less interoception. I didn't notice my breathing changed. I didn't notice I was feeling really tired. I didn't know, and so I love this. And I can't remember where I heard it, but someone explained to me once, like first the body's going to whisper in your ear, and then it's going to tap you on the shoulder, and then it's going to slap you, right? Yes. If you don't listen to the whisper, you get the tap, and you don't let the tap, you're going to get slapped, right? And the slap being the panic attack. But your body was whispering to you an hour ago. You just didn't hear it, right? And so if I can learn to listen to those whispers, I can start to course correct before I get to panic, before I get to anxiety. And it's the analogy I often like to use, like it's much harder to recover during whilst having a panic attack than it is to prevent one from happening. Yet here we are picking up the pieces, like I'm in the middle of a panic, I'm in the middle of anxiety, and I'm trying to fix it now, where it would have been far easier for 20 minutes ago, I course corrected, right? And I didn't get to this point where I'm in that red zone, right? We flipped the switch and now I'm in full-blown stress response.
Campbell, you use the term interoception, and I love the way you describe it so that people can have a better understanding of what it actually means and why it's so important. Can you tell us how you describe it, please?
Yeah, I like to simply describe interoception, right, as body awareness. And not just of my physical body in space, but more like what's happening inside my body. And so most of us know what exteroception is. That's me sensing the world through my external senses, right? What I see, taste, touch, feel, and hear. Interoception is what's happening inside. Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I hot? Am I cold? Am I tense? Am I relaxed, right? These are all internal bodily states. And the more aware of those that I am, the higher my interoceptive capacity, or the better my interoception. So I'm just more attuned to what's happening in my body.
It's so interesting that you said that the research is showing that people who tend to be experiencing more anxiety tend to lack that awareness or be lower compared to their peers, perhaps, who don't experience as much anxiety. And so this awareness that you said, you talked about awareness and then control and then optimization. So life is so full on, isn't it? Like, honestly, there's, we all have a lot going on, and we're often coasting. We're not as mindful as we need to be, should be, could be, would enjoy life more if we were. And so how does one increase their awareness around breathing? Because if listeners can walk away from listening, or probably walking and listening, hopefully, to this episode at the moment, but consider this idea, because I love these practical ideas. That picture this. You've just had a conversation with Campbell, and Campbell said, right, for the next week, I really want you to have more awareness. How can we improve our awareness when we've already been so out of touch with the way our body has been responding in certain situations?
Yeah, this is such a good question. I'm so glad you asked it. I like to steer people, so we want to have this double-pronged approach. We want to have a formal and an informal way to do this, or a kind of like, I have a sit-down practice and then I have an opportunistic practice. And so let's kind of discuss both, right? The kind of sit-down formal practice, to me, you've got two options. Number one is I sit down and I do breath awareness, right? AKA meditation. But the goal here is not necessarily meditation, because I know a lot of people that do experience anxiety have a bit of meditation, that's when the voices in my head are the loudest. That's when I feel like I should be doing all these other things, right? It's like this quite uncomfortable state. So forget the word meditation. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes, right? Maybe 5 minutes if you're feeling like you'd like to push yourself a little bit. And I'm just going to sit down and observe my breath. I'm just going to notice it come in, and I'm just going to try and pick up the details. The analogy I often like to give people in this scenario is like, let's say you were wanting to learn Spanish and you sat down in the middle in front of two people having a conversation in Spanish. The first thing is it would just be noise. You don't speak the language. You would just be literally hearing noises bounce around and you have no idea what they're talking about. But as you start to learn the language, you might pick up a word here and there. It's like, oh, he just said dog and she just said cat, And then I'd start to get the context of a conversation, and eventually I can communicate, right? I can speak Spanish now. I want you to think about your breath is a language that you don't yet know how to speak. So you're going to sit down and do breath awareness, and you're going to be like, well, what am I noticing? Right? Yeah, I'm breathing. What else is there? That's it. It's like, just sit and just keep noticing. And eventually you start to pick up all these little details, right? The quality of the breath. How smooth is it? Is it chaotic? Is it full? Is it tight? Does it feel expansive, or does it feel condensed and contracted, right? That's only going to come through repetition and practice. You're learning the language of your breathing. So kind of sitting down, just having a formal practice, I'm just going to sit. I'm not going to change my breath in any way. I'm not going to do it right or wrong or good or bad. I'm just trying to pay attention. There's a part of my brain that's kind of spying on my breathing. And when I sit and notice my breath, I'm kind of flexing that muscle, right? That part of my brain is getting a little bit more online, a bit more alert. The second is the more opportunistic practice. Whenever you have the I'm feeling X, right? I'm stressed, I'm tired, I'm excited, I'm happy, I feel really grateful, right? Whenever you have that I'm feeling sentiment, just try and notice, how am I breathing, right? So I'm stressed. What does my breathing look like when I'm feeling stressed? I'm excited. What does my breathing look like when I feel excited? You're picking up in these subtle differences in your breathing patterns based on your emotional state, right? And we know there's beautiful research to show respiratory patterns, emotional states, right? They are tied very intimately together. And I don't even need to explain this to everyone. What do you do when you're really frustrated? Right? That frustrated sigh of relief, sigh of frustration, right? You didn't decide to do that. That breath is a reflection of your state, right? We do that when we feel grateful, when we feel excited, when we feel overwhelmed, right? My breathing is tied to my emotional state. So by having this kind of like, I'm feeling, and then I notice my breathing, I'm picking up on all these little differences. So now I've got this formal practice. I'm learning to speak the language of my breath, right? Learning to listen to it and see what it's telling me. And then this opportunistic practice where I'm tying my breathing to certain emotional states that I experience. And in that way, we're starting to just become a little bit more aware of our breath. And I always like to give people here's why it's been so hard in the past. Our brain likes to relegate breathing to the background. Why? Well, you do it 22 to 25,000 times every day. Imagine if you noticed every single one. You'd just get nothing done. It's the same reason that no one can feel clothing touching their skin until I just said that, right? And now immediately everyone's like, oh, I feel my t-shirt or my shorts or my food in my shoes. But when I mentioned, feeling your clothing, you notice, right? I can now pick up on my shirt or my shoes or my socks.
Yes.
And so our attention, right, it can be moved around to these different things. And we are trained in a way not to notice our breath. So we miss these subtle changes. But by having a practice of sitting down and noticing, then when I'm out and about living my life and I notice my breath just changed, right? Oh, and I'm starting to feel stressed, right? Breathing actually happens before the experience of the emotion. And so if I can catch the breathing, right, it's like, oh, course correct. Oh, I'm starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed, or what can I do about that now with my own physiology? And so this long kind of play here is the more aware I get of my breathing, the better I can actually use it to influence how I'm feeling.
And it changes the state of our nervous system. And when we are activated and we are going into essentially fight or flight, and like you said earlier, the brain doesn't know the difference between 20 new emails that are unread and not enough time to deal with it, or actually being physically in danger. And so if we have these upstream kind of tells that indicate to us that our state is changing, we are then in a position to do something. And you've already, the explanation that you've given about the relationship between respiration and emotions and how the respiration changes first, I think is really important to emphasize. And it shows how powerful even making some small and regular changes, and nothing changes if nothing changes. I just need to say that. And I've had a rough morning, Campbell. I've been out. My dad has chronic and complex health conditions and is in a lot of pain. And I've been really upset this morning because he has very much a biomedical model of treatment and change and looks very outside of himself to who can help me. And what I think is really important for us all to know is that yes, there are times when we absolutely need that, and anyone coming to you for breathwork training or to see you as a physiotherapist and for you to integrate all of the different approaches and the research as a whole system of mind and body is important. Yes, we need that. But, the idea of sitting and for 3 minutes observing our breathing, I mean, the serenity and the peace and the calm and the contentment that can come from that, and yet there will be a lot of resistance because it is uncomfortable. It is pausing, isn't it? It's stopping when there feels like there's so much to do. But I really want to emphasize for listeners that when we do make a commitment to ourselves to take ownership of what we can control, there's so much scope for change and improvement and better quality of life. And Campbell, what do you find with your clients when it comes to behaviour change? Because we know so much. We all know, everybody listening could think, yes, I know I should do more of this or not do as much of that, or eat more of this or not eat that. But, everything in moderation and being mindful and intentional about our actions. But is it just that as people start to become more aware and start to then develop more control and experience the benefits of having, oh, okay, I've really noticed I was holding my breath when I sent that email, right? Take a moment to recalibrate, reset. Is it self-fulfilling, are you finding with your clients, when the breathing awareness rate is raised and then the control starts to come in, that just the pure experiencing your body differently and experiencing life differently, is that what you find helps your clients to really progress and ultimately find more freedom from the anxiety that they've had or lived with maybe their whole lives?
Yeah, honestly, I do. Like, the short answer to that, absolutely. I often joke, like, breathwork's kind of like a gateway drug to wellness. Because as you develop that, like, oh, right, I do have access to feeling better. Let's just use a general term there. Like, now I'm kind of like more motivated to maybe eat better and look after my sleep. And maybe I should move more, because it's like, now I'm getting these little glimpses, right, of what my life could look like if I wasn't waking up anxious every day and I wasn't begrudging the things and the commitments, and it's feeling like, what if that looked different? And so, like, starting to develop awareness and having these little moments of self-regulation becomes this kind of stepping stone. It's like, now I've taken that first step. What's the next step I can take? And in doing that, we start to develop this direction that we're going in. I often come back, it's like, I try my best to think of, like, how can we, like, define breathwork in a way that people don't have this perception or this preconceived idea of, oh, breathwork means, a bunch of people lying in a room, hyperventilating, We tend to see breathwork on social media. And breathwork, in my mind, is nothing more than clearly communicating with your body. That's it, right? It's like you're taking control of the line of communication and you're saying, I'm safe, right? There is no imminent threat. It's okay for me to drop my guard. It's like, whatever you want that communication to be, you start to learn how to tell your body, right, what's the appropriate state for us to be in, rather than what state am I used to? What state has been conditioned into me because I'm always multitasking, doing all these things, right? It's so interesting. I've been playing this self-awareness game with myself a little bit more recently because, we've got a 2-year-old who hasn't been sleeping for the past 6-7 weeks. And it's like so fascinating to me that I start noticing it's like, I'm getting a bit more reactive and I'm a bit less patient and I'm not exercising as much anymore. And now I don't care as much about what I'm eating. And it's like, it's all stemmed from this thing. Yes. And I had this experience, right? My wife was back in Philadelphia for a week and my mom came, and like, it just turned out to be this really difficult week, like separation anxiety, my son missed, and it's like, if I went to the doctors, like, I have anxiety right now, right? Do I, or am I underslept, a little bit over caffeinated, feeling a little bit like I don't, there's no pathology here. It's just like my needs aren't being met. And I'm experiencing these symptoms that we label as anxious, right? Or overwhelmed or a bit burnt out. And it's like, do I really have this pathology, or is it just this combination of circumstances, right? Where I'm a little bit undercharged and I'm a little bit over, And as soon as like I was able to recognize that, it's like, oh, let me come back to the very basic building blocks, right? Can I take 5 minutes in the morning, right? Can I move my body? Even if it's just 10 minutes of me picking up a weight and jumping around and jumping on the spot, it's like, sure, I can't do my 30 minutes of exercise that I'd like to do, but that doesn't mean I can't do 5 minutes. And as soon as I started building back in these really tiny things, my anxiety went away. And I think we sometimes forget that. We get so used to it that we then just have this identity that's like, I'm just an anxious person. Well, are you? Or have you been so long without basic needs being met of good sleep and good hydration and good nutrition and supporting your nervous system and social connection and nature and all these things that you've just become really familiar with this set of symptoms that come with your needs not being met? And so I think that little bit of a reframe that we can have is like, and when we see our symptoms as a prompt rather than a punishment, right? It's like, what is this prompting me to notice? What is this prompting me to change? Oh, you know what? I've been sitting in this chair for 4 hours and my back hurts. That's a prompt. I don't have back pain. My body's asking me to move, and those little things that when we can start to reframe them, I think they point us in the right direction. It's like, oh God, my body's broken. It's like, no, my body's asking for some movement. I'm feeling a bit like itchy in my skin. It's like, I got to go and do something. I need to get some energy out. Oh, I didn't notice. I've been sitting here for 6 hours. Like, this is a regular occurrence for me. Like, I can be on back-to-back Zoom calls and then I'm teaching and I jump on a podcast and I get to the end of the day and I'm like, why do I feel so? I'm like, oh, wait, look at the time. I've literally been in this chair more or less straight for the last 7 hours. Like, my needs aren't being met. Like, there's no problem. My body is prompting me that it wants something different. And we can look at all of our symptoms in that way of like, what are these signaling to me? What do I need to change? And there's lots of rabbit holes we can go down there. But I think that bigger question of like, is this a punishment or is this a prompt has really helped myself and a lot of the clients that I teach that to start to reframe and be like, what's my body asking me, right? It's not punishing me with anxiety. What's it asking me for? More sleep, more social connection, more time in nature, less work, less commitments. Who knows, right? It can, again, when we think of anxiety being quite subjective, it's different for everyone why you're experiencing those symptoms, but what could that be prompting you?
Yes, it's a prompt, not a punishment, that gives not only agency, but a lot of hope. In the same way that I remember when my nan passed away many years ago, I remember feeling so sad for so long, for months. And I remember going to my GP about something and just starting to cry and just saying, talking, more about my mental health and just saying, I'm still feeling just so sad all the time. And we talked about kind of when it bubbles up and how I'm functioning. And she just said to me, you're having a very, very natural response to the circumstances. This is a very natural, normal response. And we knew that it was easing. It wasn't like it was at the start and it wasn't as often, but it was still there. And she's like, of course. This is just a normal response to the circumstances that you're in, where you've had the death of a loved one. And what you were just saying about if we're not well slept, over caffeinated, we're maybe sitting for too long or just not moving, or you've got extra demands and responsibilities on you at the moment whilst you're sort of flying solo as a parent and your partner's away, and what you're experiencing in your physiology is relevant to the circumstances you're in. And so when we can look at it from that point of view, it just is a freedom in a way, isn't there, from this pathologizing. And of course, we need to say that there are people who, the experience of anxiety absolutely needs professional help. Absolutely. And people like Campbell are these professionals that can help you, as well as other members of your health team if needed. But there is so much that we can do. And there's so many questions I'd like to ask, but we talk about a youth mental health crisis. And that's the space I work in the sense that I work with parents and teachers and principals and teenagers. There's a lot of challenges in schools, a lot of parents and kids really suffering, a lot of kids not going to school. You're probably aware of the school refusal or school can't kind of challenges. And I know that you've said that there's a missing piece from when it comes to kind of supporting young people, adolescents, with their mental health, sort of that's missing from sort of some of the traditional approaches. And I wondered if perhaps we might have already talked about a lot of that already, but would love you to speak to that, please, Campbell.
Yeah. I think it starts with conversations like this. I recently shared a post on the similarities of symptoms that come from mouth breathing and sleep disordered breathing and ADHD. And a few people jumped on that post and very much quickly attacked, right? It was not and this wasn't say, hey, all ADHD is caused by mouth breathing. It's not what I suggested. It's saying, like, when we look at the symptoms of dysfunctional breathing and disordered sleep, they present very similar to these behavioral issues, right? That we're seeing is more and more common. Is there a conversation that we can have here about addressing these contributing factors? And it's not just breathing. Kids, like when we start to look at the statistics, right? If I made you tonight, Jodi, stay up and have fragmented sleep and then drink 2 or 3 cups of coffee tomorrow, would you have anxiety or are you over caffeinated? Like that seems like a simple question, but then we look at the statistics of how many teenagers are drinking coffee or caffeinated beverages like Red Bull or Monster. It's like, do they have anxiety or are they experiencing, right, an autonomic arousal from a stimulant that they're drinking on top of poor sleep patterns, right? When we hear that, exercise is one of the most effective antidepressants compared to all medications on the market, is it that exercise is an antidepressant or is it that not exercising is a depressant, right? We see mental health and mood change when we're not moving our body. Well, when we look at the statistics of how many youth are sedentary, again, let's open up the conversation. Instead of being like, oh, you're just calling all depression lack of movement. No, I'm not. But I'm saying a lack of movement is a contributing factor to low mood. I'm saying a lack of sleep is a contributing factor, right, to poor attention. I'm saying dysfunctional breathing shows what it does to brain waves, what it does for learning and memory and attention, right? Like the research is there. A recent study came out of Brazil that showed 63% of children have dysfunctional breathing. And so if we don't have the conversation, we're going to continue to pathologize, we're going to continue to label disorder or dysfunction, and we're going to tend to go down the psychiatric or pharmaceutical route, which is not addressing root cause, which is, do we have a generation of kids that are overstimulated, under nutrition, like they have nutritional deficiencies because food has changed. They're sitting on a screen for upwards of 6 hours a day, right? They're not sleeping, they're drinking caffeine, they're not moving. Do they have mental health disorder or are their needs not being met? And I think just the first thing is like, let's have that conversation. Because if we don't, and we shoot down any alternative possibilities to these diagnostic labels that we use, then we're going to be stuck with the mental health crisis that we're in today, and we're not pursuing, right, these alternatives and looking for a solution. We're just continuing down the same path. And so I think, I feel very fortunate. I was right on the cusp, right? I remember when we didn't have the internet, right? I didn't know it's like I was out climbing trees and running around. And like, I remember getting the internet when I think I was probably like 13 or 14, right? And so then this like evolution of social media and digital, it's like, but the generation after that, 5 years after, they were born into this digital generation where it's just this constant barrage of stimulus and there's expectations and the social construct that's changed. Like, we haven't changed our education system in relation to how much the world has changed in just the past 10 years, let alone the past 25 years, And so I think we have to have this conversation about, well, what do we need to change? Is it more physical outlets and less sitting at a desk? Is it more down-regulation or co-regulation in the classroom because the teacher has been taught how to co-regulate by bringing down people's nervous systems through something like slow breathing, right? It's like, if we start to approach those things, or supporting parents, it's like, here's how you can help, a digital detox or facilitate optimal sleep, or have a conversation about what caffeine and stimulants do to your 12-year-old that's drinking a Red Bull on the way to school and then has behavioral issues. Like, I think we just have to have that conversation and look at, okay, so how can we address those problems rather than there's this mental health epidemic or there's this, disordered population where it's like, I think there's a beautiful quote from David Bidler, who runs Physiology First, this wonderful non-for-profit, that like, a normal response to an abnormal environment is not a pathology, right? Anxiety, feeling overstimulated, feeling a lack of motivation, low mood is not a disorder when the environment that's cueing that is so disordered in and of itself. And so I think us having that conversation about what do we need to change around those core pillars of movement, sleep, breathing, nutrition, right? Once we are kind of like getting those things right, then let's look at, do we still have a mental health crisis? And I think the answer to that is we probably don't, because we've actually supported these young developing nervous systems in a way that allows them to navigate this incredibly challenging world that they're born into, right? That is just changing faster than we can comprehend.
That's it.
Like, our nervous systems don't adapt at the speed that we're seeing technology change. Like, nervous systems adapt over generations, right? Like, if not tens of generations. The world, and in terms of our nervous systems, they haven't really changed in 10,000 years, 100,000 years, Yet go back 10 years ago, and it's just a wildly different world. And so we have to take that into account.
Campbell, what you've just said is more than food for thought for parents. It's really a call to action. We have a lot that we can do as parents to really help put guardrails in place for our kids when it comes to sleep, nutrition, social media use, activity, time in nature, as well as helping them to learn and understand about their physiology and the way it affects their mental health and well-being. So I think what I'd love to do is perhaps, if you're willing, to organise another time to chat with you so we can talk in more depth. But what I'd love to do now is invite you to please share with our listeners how they can work with you, where they can find you and follow you. Your Instagram videos are the bomb. You share a lot of really practical strategies for people and a lot of insights and education. So yeah, how can people find you out on the World Wide Web?
Well, I definitely try and, share as much practical take-home applicable information. And that's on Instagram. I'm at Breath Body Therapy. For those that want to dive a little bit deeper into perhaps their own breath and seeing where they can make improvements and develop the awareness and controls we spoke about today, I've got a 5-week self-paced course. And then the final option is those that are perhaps the teachers, the health practitioners, right? The doctors, the physios, the mental health practitioners that want to understand, this integrative approach that brings breath to the forefront of the conversation, right? All we spoke about today, regulating our nervous system and optimizing our physiology and developing a self-awareness. We run a practitioner training program that runs every couple of months that really just kind of tries to take a deep dive into that. And I couldn't stress this more. If you are a parent or a teacher, that's where we have this opportunity, and something you said earlier, I just want to kind of like double down on this idea that it starts at home, that our kids model us, and so me sitting quietly and taking some time, not on my phone to down regulate, like that's a modeling, But if I rush in the door and drop the bags, I'm getting the dinner on whilst I'm on the phone, it's like, okay, that's the model, right? It's go, 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 things to do, too busy, not enough time. Like, of course, that's what our children learn, and so whether you're the teacher that can kind of bring the energy down in a classroom, a parent that can do it at home, I do think that's where it starts. You don't have to have the understanding of let me instruct you about your biochemistry, right? It can be let me just show you what it looks like to slow down. Or let me make this a little formal practice in our classroom, right, of us taking a minute to slow down. I think that's where it all begins.
Thank you. Very, very well said. And please reach out to Campbell. I know that anyone that gets to work and learn from Campbell has the benefit of so much expertise and years of experience. And you're a lifelong learner, I can tell that. And so, I really appreciate what you're doing, the work you're doing, and for sharing some of your very precious time here with us down under whilst you are enjoying some time overseas. So thanks again, Campbell, for joining us.
An absolute pleasure, Dr. JODI. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners. Thank you for joining us. And please, as I often ask you, have a think about one thing that you might like to take away from this episode that you will put into practice. And as Campbell so beautifully put it at the end there, that what we model, what we do is really what our children are learning. And whether or not you're in a classroom, as a teacher, you're a parent or a professional or a person looking to improve your quality of life and to really get more calibration in your system, please do something different. And if that's your awareness, creating that awareness by the 2 strategies that Campbell mentioned, which were a deliberate, considered practice where you sit down for 3 to 5 minutes and become more aware of the language of your breath, and then have that more incidental observation happening as well, just raising that awareness, becoming more mindful of what's happening, and then you're in a better position to do something about it. So thank you again for your time, and I'll be back with another amazing guest next week. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. JODI Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.